Good afternoon and welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 237, Q&A, template talk, knockdown, name drop do-overs, and drawing. Hey folks, welcome in a little belatedly to the Takeup. Sorry for the issues here. We had some technical issues on my end where I couldn't get logged in and get things working, so things are a little loose. I might have some issues with some of my sample images that I wanted to pull up, but I will definitely be there for you and try and answer some of these questions. I realized that I had a lot of stuff kind of in my mailbag, stuff people had asked me recently that were technical questions, that were simple technical questions, but didn't really merit an entire show or really had an entire show already dedicated to them, but I wanted to answer simple portions of them or talk about them in kind of a more general, quick way before we got into some more highly technical stuff. The first thing I'm going to let you guys know is despite the fact that we do indeed have some topics today that are ready to rock, that I'm already looking forward to next week. Certainly today we're going to talk about templates. We're going to talk about knockdown and other nap-tacking stitches for a moment. We're going to talk about issues with name drops. And this is really about how do we deal with a name that isn't the way we want it to be, or how do we drop text into a name that's already been put down or some other text piece. Doesn't have to be anything else. In fact, this is also applicable to any time we want to add stitches to something that's already been stitched. And then drawing an object, just a little bit about that in specific about expectations with the objects that we're putting on screen or how we're drawing. So this is stuff we've talked about many times before. I think we're just going to kind of talk about these in a general way, and I will discuss some of the things specifically that were asked of me as questions. The other thing I hope you guys will notice as we go through this, if you hear less of me tapping on the table, I have isolated the microphone. I had some comments about that, but now I am tapping on the table and you only hear little light taps and not the booms that were coming through the connected mic that was attached to the table. So should be a little bit better. Hopefully the sound quality is all right for you guys, but we're certainly going to work on that as we move forward. But next week, I want you to know we are already set up, crossed fingers to make sure it's going to happen. We're actually going to have Joe Kramer back in, and I'm going to be talking about some multimedia and applique. I've got some stuff that I've done with custom sublimated appliques, and I want to show you some cool software stuff about dealing with prints, nesting, bleeds, stuff like that. So we're going to talk about that, and Joe also is going to talk about some printed applique stuff. So should be really cool. We'll be announcing that as soon as we can next week, but hopefully that's something that you guys will enjoy. We're going to be digging into some more deep topics here, but I thought before we do that, let's clear out the mailbag. Let's make sure that we kind of catch some of these questions that folks have been asking me, and also, lead into some further stuff we might handle down the road. I know I've got lots of requests for more review of patch process. That's coming very soon. We've got some requests for higher level review of digitizing gradients and shading. We can get into that again. We've done it several times, but I can certainly run you through that again if you would like. Certainly, we've got more questions about how to handle some of the simpler shading techniques that I've done, but they want to see that stuff done in software. That's also possible. But for today, we're going to handle some stuff from the mailbag. We are going to get more into that stuff. You are going to see some more, also some 3D foam from me again soon. There's a lot of technique stuff that I'm going to talk about coming up soon that is more on the lines of what I once did, more highly detailed into the techniques working in software. But for today, let's get to the mailbag once we get through with, of course, the thing that I always do, which I stop and talk to the reciprocator. So if you are here on the replay squad, you don't want to see me talking to everybody, by all means, fast forward, head on until you see me throw up a topic or something of that nature, until you see me start to share my screen, and then you will know that we are back on track. Otherwise, I'm going to talk to the folks who are here and make sure that we have a chance to get everybody in, talking, and enjoying each other's company. So today, let's say hi first. Doug Subble came in early on and said, hi, everyone from rainy Los Angeles. Hopefully it's doing well with you. It's dark and cool out here in Pennsylvania, I'll tell you that for sure. I'm still not used to that. Not used to early winter from this Albuquerque, New Mexico kid. But we have a lot of folks coming in. Crystal coming in from Virginia. Hi from VA, she says. Hi, Crystal. Cindy coming in from Odessa, Texas. Happy to see you here. Frank coming in from across the pond. Thank you for always being an awesome supporter of the embroidery arts, Frank, and sharing all the stuff that we do out here and all the education we're putting together. I have lots of you folks talking to each other, which I love. We got that old comment. I'm just going to be honest and tell you this comment keeps coming back up. There's a problem with EV Mux. That is not the current YouTube link. I apologize. If you need the current YouTube link and you're on another streaming platform, I will throw that at you guys. Sometimes that's kind of like the place of record is the YouTube channel for right now. So let's see everybody here. And oh, by the way, Yosta, I haven't seen you in a long time. Hi from Sweden. Happy to see you here too. Love it. We have Lisa Shahu. I'm going to show a little piece of design work from Lisa tonight, very likely. And she says, greetings from Colorado. She's been doing awesome work that she shares with you folks through the Brilliance Project blog. So love that. Got DJ Kev coming in from North Carolina. I can't, every time I say North Carolina, I hear P. Pablo. I'm sorry. If you're of a certain age, you probably know what I'm talking about. Sorry, folks. All right. We have lots of folks talking to each other. Love it. And we've got Lisa saying, sounds like a great topic for next week. Yeah, no, I think there's some really cool stuff people don't know also about our software, about Brilliance, that we can do with multimedia that I've been itching to show. And I'm gonna haul some of that out, as well as show some of the other pieces that I've already done. Vincent coming in saying, happy to join live. It is a rare event. Hey, thank you for being here. Like I said, this is kind of a mailbag event. So if you guys have questions or stuff you want to ask me, feel free to ask today. This is that kind of day. We're going to probably keep it a little short if we can. But at the same time, like I said, had some technical issues, but we're going to jump on it anyway and try and get some of these questions answered. So Irene coming in saying hello all, or Aaron, I might have said that wrong again. I think I did that a long time ago and did it, reading it out again. Love to see everybody talking to each other and really catching up, which is awesome. Starfish says hi from Munich. Awesome. From München. Thank you for coming in. Candy coming in from Sedona, Arizona. Love that. Oh, so Vincent was Candy. Sorry, Candy. I don't know these things. I just read your names out. And yeah, lots of cool stuff going on. Oh, DJ Kev says, I toured with him back in the day. Oh my God, man. Royalty here. I knew you were already. You were cool, but I didn't think you were that cool, my man. Love it. Yeah, and Aaron, I know I said it wrong. I'm sorry. That was me. I try to remember everybody, but yeah, once I go past it, it's a little hard. And I'm going to say this. I might be wrong. Marvin, I hope I'm correct. Hello from Napanee, Indiana. I hope you are doing all right as well. All right, folks. So let me go ahead and grab some people. Oh, you have a question on creating the V knitwear look for Christmas. All right. I have an episode about that. I will probably pull that up while we're talking about that. In fact, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to bring your question up so people can see what I'm talking about. I do believe I have one for that. So let me try and get the video up now. I'm going to literally grab that while we're talking about. And yes, you can hear my big old mechanical keyboard, but it's less booming than it used to be, at least. I will see if I can grab it now. If I can't, I will get it for you later, but I'm pretty sure I do. Let's go ahead and grab that now. I'm going to go ahead and give you this right now. So this is the link to the post. I'm going to pop this up on screen because I can. Let's just go ahead and grab that on the screen share. So this is the video, episode 90, where I talk about that to some degree. And I know that as we got into here, I do talk a little bit about that pattern. So I know it's in here somewhere, I believe. We'll try and grab it. There we are. We talk about it right here. So we are at about an hour and 4 minutes, my man. So that's where we're going. I will try and share that right now with the start at hour 3. So look, live. This is why you show up to the lives, folks, because then you get to steer this thing a little bit. The link that is now in the comments, and I will go ahead and put this up as a banner now. I'll go ahead and drop out the comments so we can grab that. This is the episode you probably want to check out. I will, if you want to do a more detailed version of this later down the road. If you guys need to grab that now. Episode 90, holidays and handwork is probably the one that I've gone into the most detail on it. I have talked about it in the vintage layout before, but yeah, it is really about carefully plotting and doing triple thickness individual stitches. So triple run like a bean stitch. I did these manually. I'm going to be honest with you on that. And connecting them in such a way that it goes from piece to piece in a standard fashion and it doesn't have to be trimmed. This was also done with 12 weight thread. So this is, honestly, the one that I did the sample with is Burmilana cotton from Madeira. I don't actually recommend that. I'm going to be honest with you, because I find that the wool blend doesn't fuzz up, make as much lint, or break as much. However, Burmilana 12 weight thread, big old needle. So we're talking about that 100 needle, and you're definitely going to have to back off your tension. So that's something where you want to look at the recommendations from Madeira for their Burmilana thread, or whatever 12 weight thread you want to use, and back all that stuff down. If you've seen Joe talking about thick threads, that's what's going on here. Can you do it without thick threads? Probably. Would it look quite as good without the fuzzy thread? I would say probably not. But we can do that in a more detailed fashion, probably not today. If you want to go over that, though, that might be a thing I can handle in the next couple weeks here as well. We can maybe go into that a little deeper and talk about how I plan these things. But I believe we've got documents here for it. And if not, I'm just going to say this right now. If you want to email me, you can absolutely do it. embroideryeric@gmail.com. I will put that up on screen in just a second here, and tell me you want that. And I'll go ahead and throw that up on screen while we're doing this live, because this is how I like to be, I guess. Just do this stuff while we're rolling. I will show you the slide that goes with this as well. So if that's something that you want, you would like to see the slide that I showed to plan this out, I can absolutely show you the slides from this that give you a better option, or at least see the slide up close instead of in a video, so that you've got the document for how I plotted these and laid them out. And we can always do a replay on screen as well sometimes. So yeah, absolutely willing to do that. But yeah, we'll get from here back onto the topics we started out with today. But certainly a worthwhile thing. We do like to handle the holiday stuff, and so hopefully that was helpful for you for sure. So yeah, lots of comments, I know, coming through with that. But yeah, check that out. That might help out a little bit. If that's not what you're talking about, or if you need more detail, by all means, email me. We may go ahead and do another run through that. That's something that I would really love. So I've got a couple other comments here before we get going. So you're very welcome, sir. Thank you for being here and for always being a supporter of DJ Kev. So I appreciate you. And also everybody else coming in, Jesse coming in, who always comments and likes and comments on the replays. Thank you very much for doing so. Out of Cyclone, West Virginia. And we've got Yosta up saying, I'm burning the midnight oil. 19 times 130,000 stitch embroideries. So now I am the bobbin king. Boy, I know that feeling. Running jacket backs and burning bobbins. I've been there myself, sir. So good luck. And here's hoping you do well with your your attempts to get that done. We all know sometimes it doesn't work the way we want it to. All right, folks. So with that, let's kind of get into the topics at hand. First couple of things are, I had somebody ask me in kind of a I wouldn't say a way that is, unkind, but they kind of were like, hey, you know what? We see all these home users making templates or using templates for stuff, and I don't always understand what this is about. Let's talk about templates. What do you use them for in a professional fashion? And the funny thing is, really recently, we talked about what was going on at Printing United. And I told you guys all about this concept of embroidery on demand. I don't know if you remember when we talked about that, where they were really pushing this concept of, we're going to take these online orders, and when we take the online orders, they go straight to the machine. They were using the Melco Summit Manager to send stuff straight to the Melco Summit machines. That was how they did it, but you could just do it with any, like I said, any networked machine. You could do this pretty reasonably. They were dropping those things directly from digital straight to that concept of, that direct fulfillment. And really what it was, like I said before, it's what I called it was stock plus personalization plus e-commerce, because this is the actual formula for the embroidery on demand. It's an e-commerce platform that allows you to set up lettering, or at least preview the lettering. And then it was a stock design plus personalization. The thing is, you don't need all of the highly technical version of it to make it work. But that's something that really I have done. So if you want to talk about templates, if you're saying, hey, it's only a home market thing, absolutely not. It's not a home market thing. Plus, the other thing is, even if it's something for you, for yourself, long term, if you're doing something for your own needs, so this has nothing to do with e-commerce, templates also are just time-saving tools. It's something that helps you to not have to do something over and over and over and over again. There are certain things you can set up once that you will never have to set up again. And one of the ones that gets me kind of complete, where I'm like, I don't understand why people don't do this stuff, would be working on name drops, doing stuff for, I've done these for years and years, name drops and the like for team sports especially, or anything where you've got a logo that has to have a name or text under it or something else. Now, can you do it for e-commerce? Yeah, I'm going to show you a couple of graphics from old e-commerce sites that I built years ago, just to kind of make it clear that, templates really do have a place in commercial embroidery, right? So why would I lay out a template? Why would I make something like that? Well, because I would like to be able to drop this stuff in very easily, and it doesn't really matter if I'm going to do everything manually. I could have anything from an order form out to a full e-commerce solution. And having a template where I lay things out ahead of time, especially when we're talking about doing name drops, doing division names under logos, things like that, having a template is super, super useful. And there's different ways we can build them. Certainly you can build them in ways that make them usable if you're trying to, let's say, distribute a template to someone or have it usable by someone who is not you. Let's say you're building a template and you're expecting somebody else on your crew to handle the template. Then you may want to think about things like, how do I name objects? How do I handle the way the template itself is built? Why would I make different decisions about how it's laid out? Yada, yada, yada. And like I said, I would like to get into that a little bit and just go through this concept of templates and talk about them just a little bit, show you some stuff. So let's talk about it just briefly and say, all right, so yes, we're going to talk about templates, but remember, templates can be, you know, a design where we just want to change text out from it. We want to have a certain fun design, and we want to have the text that's able to be changed in it, and that's it. And that's all we're working on, and we're not really doing anything any more interesting than that. But you have to remember that there's all these other options that we can do with this stuff, and it's not necessarily just this, super easy stuff where we're trying to just drop name drops or text above and below something, but that can be good enough. That can be something that's useful anytime. And I'm actually going to crib a note from Lisa. It's actually something else she says that's unrelated to templates. So Lisa Shaw, your ears are probably ringing right now. What I'm going to say is this. Lisa says, and this is about saving your files, you should save your file anytime you don't want to do everything over again. Which, believe me, my little Command S, key combination is clacking constantly. I save my files all the time, and I save versions every time I make a decision that's going to make a destructive change that I think I might want to undo. So there's the corollary. The Campbell corollary to that is save a new version of a file every time you think you might want to go back to the previous version. You're about to do something destructive. And so those are the two things about saving files. But I'm going to say, here's the third thing. Let's go ahead and expand on this concept from Lisa. Why make a template? Make a template anytime you're going to do something over and over and over again, and you don't want to set it up again. And so this means every kind of team sports, every kind of business to business naming, uniforming, anytime we're dealing with that kind of stuff, we want to use a template. The other reason to use a template is because sometimes there are certain features. I talked about this all in a video about warping text. We talked about warping text and envelopes and all of that. There are features that require you to have a shape in place, like an envelope, in order to warp text into an area, into a specific design, or into a certain layout. And in that case, you're kind of going to make a template no matter what, even if you're using it for one specific word, one specific name, one whatever. Doing it in a way that is clean and repeatable and makes sense for the design is useful either way, right? It's still good either way. And that way you might actually reuse your template down the road. So I'm going to show you some stuff. We're going to talk about templates, and I'll just kind of explain some things about, choices you might make and reasons why you might do something a certain way, as far as like, how do we save them? How do we name them? How do we deal with that stuff? So like I said, we're going to have some fun stuff to talk about as we go through this, but certainly there'll be me just kind of explaining stuff and talking about, how I would handle this stuff myself, right? So what I would do and why I use it for business, and how I use it for just, the stylistic tweaks we can do to designs and text. So first thing is, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys, let's just go ahead and bring up kind of the examples of personalization and just say, this is what I'm talking about. We're saying in a professional stance where this does come from and how I know this is how this works, because I've done a lot of this kind of work before. And so, I'm going to try and kind of talk about some of this stuff. Like I said, I crashed earlier right before we got going. So unfortunately, we do have some of my samples are not where I want them to be. So I'm not showing you everything I want to be. But let's go ahead and bring up the screen share for a second. And we'll talk about this. So immediately, first thing I'm just going to say is, like, this is not something that's all that arcane. It's not that crazy. It's not something we necessarily have to analyze to death. But I am going to say that it's just worthwhile to understand that a lot of personalization in the business world can be really simple. It doesn't have to be name drops, but we did tons of these websites that we would set up where really the only thing that was changing was a small name drop here. Now, in this case, this was actually hosted on a website that handled the personalization in it. So this is very much more like the embroidery on demand concept. When you have a business that has multiple divisions that may change, you can either create all these combinations, or if it's allowed to be done by the people who are ordering, you can have them fill those things out themselves. And certainly, of course, it can be just name drops. I mean, we can just do personalization where you have one area of a chest design has a name drop on it, and that name can be done online. So that's very simple, right? That doesn't really require a template. That's more about setting up a templating setup on that particular piece, right? So that's just about doing that for that particular company, for that particular logo, for that person who's working on that stuff. So it's something where it's like, all right, I'm setting that up in an online software in an e-commerce fashion. And it can have live preview like that, or it can be just a graphic showing where things are going to go on the garment and literally form lines telling you what's supposed to be where, with a preview of what the text would look like, even if it's not live updated, even if it's not generating the file for you. That's all still in that kind of realm of templating. And I think that's, that's certainly worthwhile. It's certainly something we can do. It's something we can look at. Um, but the thing is, you don't have to go that far with it. Certainly, it's not something you necessarily have to do to that degree. Is that something we can do? Sure. Is that something that's useful? Absolutely, it is. And certainly, we made tons of these websites where we had those. And I mean, everything from, like I said, these fully featured sites that had all the stuff pre-laid out, where we had all these design setups, where we had pre-layouts, where we had that stuff, down to things where we had very, very simple sites where there wasn't live preview. It was just where you could fill things out and you could literally see that that was being used for these company stores. So a lot of that stuff was like that, where we just had these preset setups where they were just set up with templates that had different options you could select. But you can also have live text. And the thing is, usually you have selectable stock. This is that same kind of thing. Selectable stock with a name drop on an opposite side or a name drop related to it. Now, the thing is, that can also be stuff we do for team sports. And this is what we did way back in the day. So it's on some of my older software. You're going to see some older setups that are here. But the thing is, we did this very same thing where we had pre-set up templates for different setups. So we had setups where we would have, and pardon me, I've got a message here, but here we go. We had setups for name drops. We had setups for name and number drops. We had setups for legs and sleeves and chests. And these were done with pre-populated areas where these names could be assigned through like a team naming system. Now, team naming is also not necessarily the thing you have to have. You don't have to have this pre-compiled for you. It can be just as easy to lay these things all out. And certainly when you go to preview them, I found that most of the time, if I really wanted to get the previewing done correctly on a massive order, like let's say we were doing a classic old school order, which is where we would show the setups, and then we had people literally selecting on paper forms. If you are at that level of technology with where you're at, that's fine. It's possible to do, but it still makes a lot of sense for you. Instead of laying things out, you set these things up previously in a template where you know sizes, you know layouts, and then you handle them accordingly. And that's the thing. When you're in software, and like I said, this is showing in some of my old software, the concept being that we knew where our hoop lines were, we knew how far we could go. And when we were laying stuff out, now in this particular software, I didn't have the option to, back in Wilcom, we didn't have the option to do envelopes where I could cut the envelope and have it compress lettering automatically. Certainly in this case, I had to do a lot of hand layout and selection of that stuff. Sometimes it has to happen, but we were able to lay out the text ahead of time, and we had to show previews to everybody. So often I had to break them out anyway, because if we're doing these mass orders, then we're doing previews like this. So this is the one downside of doing templates for mass orders. If you aren't using a system that just generates it for them live, is that then you have to go through an approval process. However, having our spacing consistent, having everything centered, having it set up where I can drop the names in, or using team naming when you have that option is really useful, right? So those are useful things to have a layout where we pre-set up what the name is, what the font is, the size is, the setup, the font style, the underlay style, the densities, all the settings, and we just have to copy this file over and over, or copy the name over and over, because as you guys know, the old way we did team naming back before we had any sort of manual way, or when we had to use a manual way to do it, and it's still the way we do it in lots of software. We do this in Embroiance. You can do team naming on multiple heads by dropping the names on top of each other, and you just run the logo entirely, but then you have the names on individual color stops, and you turn the heads on and off on your multi-head machine as you go. And that allows you to do team naming and to run one logo and then run individual names in groupings usually by size and by head count. This allows you to get your production done much quicker than you might have done otherwise. So that's an old school way to handle it. But the thing is, that's still a really useful way to handle templating. Now, certainly, what I would say now is we have a lot of options that we didn't have before. And certainly using the tools that I've gotten in Brilliance now, the thing that I've been doing lately is much more in the way of warping text and setting things up. You can do it in a way that's also doesn't have to be, highly technical. It doesn't have to be crazy shapes. You guys know that I love to show you the crazy shapes and the fun stuff, but it doesn't have to be crazy shapes. It can also be setting up this stuff just in layouts. And in fact, I'm going to show you very briefly a piece that Lisa just did, and she's got this set up in a template style. So we haven't released this yet. You're going to see this on a post over to Brilliance really soon. She saw this really cool art where somebody had done this like classic casserole dish, and they did this university style, varsity style garment that said green bean casserole. And I know this sounds goofy, but you got to see it to know it. And honestly, once you see it, you'll love it because it's a great little piece, and I really do love what she's done with it. So I think it's worthwhile to kind of take a look at it. It's fun, but I'm just going to talk to you about it and say, hey, there's reasons you can do templating that it doesn't necessarily have to be related to any other type of shape alteration or anything else. It can just be something where it makes sense to the shape and it's easier to lay out different lettering inside of it. So in this case, I'm just going to show you the piece that Lisa did. And this is the green bean casserole piece. I kind of love it. We've got that classic casserole dish here. And on top of that, with the classic casserole dish piece, you've got the ability to select that yourself. You've got these lettering setups. And she went ahead and left this text standard. Now, the thing is, you can do it this way. You can also do it with a laid out envelope. So even straight text, if you have an envelope, you can set it up so that it maintains the same size. And in fact, up here at the top, you can see she's done this with an envelope. So instead of just using an arc up, arc down, which you can do, like let's go ahead and grab the text and I'll show you what I'm talking about. If we were working on this text here, we could, if we wanted to, arc the top, arc the bottom, and make casserole look the same way as green bean. You could do it that way, and that's still a good template piece because then you can type something else in there and it still maintains its shape. However, what I'm going to tell you is I like this concept of using this sort of lettering instead, to use an envelope for this in the other direction. Because what the thing is, let's say I do leave that there, and let's go ahead and put that back into that configuration for a second. We're going to go ahead and arc that like I just did. And if I type something that's much shorter, if I just say dish here instead of casserole, I have those same settings for the curvature on that. And the curvature is not set to the width. It is a percentage of curvature. So for my money, I probably don't like that as much. But with the envelope here, we can do a couple different things, right? So we have this lettering envelope where it is assigned to this envelope here. Envelope 3, letters 3 assigns it and locks it together. And the thing is, right now, it will stretch to fill the entire area. So the one thing you might not love is if you go and do this right now, the way it is, without turning on certain flags, you can make it look a little funny. Because if I just said dish up here, it would try and stretch dish to be the entire envelope. So you do have to set things up ahead of time so that it makes sense for your layout. Dish may not be what you want to do here. You can also set a flag on this. And the great thing is, once I set this flag for centering, it will stay centered and it will just stretch it to the height. So you might like that, depending on the lettering you're using or the type of text you're using, that might work for you. Where if I just said hot dish up here, which I know is certainly in the proper parlance for some areas, well, then if I say hot dish up here and I go ahead and say enter and I set that text up, then what you're going to see is that stays the same vertical size, but it stays the width of the original layout. So if we go ahead and text it, let's check this text, I can actually set my width and it'll stay that width and only stretch to the vertical. So we have that option. And the thing is, I can set that flag here one time. And this is also if you set this with any other sort of software that has settings for the lettering object. It'll maintain the lettering object. It won't have the same flags that you do in Brilliant, certainly. But there are other flags or settings that you can set in the menu for the particular software you're using. The concept is, though, that we can set this up and have this thing maintain the look that we want it to have. We can even set up multiple options and have those multiple options be addressable. And that's something that I did in the Patch Artist software that we've done, and that I've done in several other softwares, is allowed for multiple options for laying out on a template. The great thing is, now I'm using this great text from, this is from Patch Artist. It's Patch Artist Fire, so it's like a firefighter kind of text. But that's the thing. I can now, if I want to change this, I can change this to whatever. If I, for whatever reason, I really love mung bean casserole, I don't know what that would be. You're going to have to tell me what that is. I can either do that as a multiple text layer with this, because we do have the ability to put multiple layers in there, or we can go ahead and run it like that. And the great thing is, now I have that set up and I can reuse that for anything. And in fact, the other great thing about that is that I can also just say, if I want to change this to something entirely different, I've got the setup. It's going to stay in the same curvature. It's going to stay the way it was before. And if I want to change the way this is put together, I can do this very simply and it stays in the same configuration. But what you can see is, if you don't have this in a warp or an envelope, then what's going to happen is it's going to maintain the settings of the original object. So the two things to really kind of notice here about the way this is set up are the two options we have. Do we just leave the text object as it is? If we leave the text object as it is, then whenever you type something new into the text object, which is really kind of what we usually use for these templates, the text object will have specific settings and it will maintain those no matter what we do. If it's stretched, the height, those are going to be maintained. If we have curvature set, if we have angle or shear set, it's going to maintain those no matter what. If we use an envelope, we can decide for ourselves, do we want this to stretch it to fill the entire envelope? Do we want it to be centered so that it maintains that centering no matter what? And do we want it to stretch in, just height? Or do we want it to be laid out left or right? We can also do things with alignment. We could left align this and have it stretch to the left, maintain only that stretch up to the top, which also means that we could do things like put an icon or some other image over here on the right-hand side and have this warp up to that icon, up to that shape. We can play with that. So the great thing is this allows you to also give enough creativity, enough tools to the people who need them, but not too much. So the thing is, you've got the ability for people who are not doing design work themselves to work on these files, or for you to release these out and let a customer even type into these, or to use these depending on the software you're using, depending on your online setup, somehow with an e-commerce system. Now, not in this case, but still, this allows you to do that, whether you want to distribute these to someone else or you're using them internally. Plus, the other great thing is we currently have the ability up here, you can see we have the ability to name these things, right? So over here it says casserole dish. We have this named as letters, but really frequently, if you are using something like this as bridge up, that's the name of the envelope, I can also name that if I want to top bridge, right? I can call it that, and now it's top bridge. If I made a secondary envelope down here, I can name that text under, and I can even in this design, as we have the entire design here, I can put notes in the design that say, top text in top bridge. You know what I mean? I could put notes in our design and have this for later so that the next time I go to lay this stuff out, I have the ability to work on this later and have all of these files and informations with me, right? This is how that stuff works. And point of fact, this is how we build our own stuff when we're trying to distribute it to other folks for use. So when we have things like our Halloween stuff we've done previously, if you look at any of the patch artist stuff that we've done before, if you look at any of the kind of sample items that we've put together, let's actually go, since we'll make this the Lisa show. She actually contributed these, which I really do love. She's got these lovely bowling pins, these footballs, this stuff. Those all have notes and stuff in them. If you look at all of the emblem options that I've put together here, like multi-layer emblems, these all have multiple options for how to use this text. And that's something that you can do for yourself as well, so that you have different layout options down the road. So what we can see is there's all of these different options, and they're all marked on, and there's usually more than one option for these. So templates like this, yes, a lot of you will think of it as, okay, this is something that Erich does because he's building stuff for other people to use. Sure, yeah, that is certainly something you can do, but there's other options beyond that. It's also something that I would do in-house, because believe me, every time that I want to use a shoulder patch or a shield patch or something like that, I want the ability to use all the different locations on that thing very simply. I don't want to have to do it multiple times. I don't want to have to mess around with it. And you can see, like if I bring one of these in, I'll just bring in this little shoulder piece right here. We're going to go ahead and check that out. Round wedge short is the name that I gave it. If we look at our notes on it, we see that the baseline 1 is the upper arc, and I give you the way to name that and set it up. Baseline 2 is the bottom edge. And so I've got those options pre-laid out for that one. That, and in the case of something that's got a little more complicated layout options, you'll find that there's even more than that, and something that you can set up for yourself, where if you're going to be doing these things over and over and over again, you might want to lay these out in different ways down the road. So you might want to use an entire envelope, portions of an envelope, be upper, lower, have different options on how to fill that space. And certainly in some of these shields where they get pretty complicated, you'll see that I'll have multiple options on how to lay that text out. So you can have like this shield here, and we can see there's all these different options. If we go to the notes on this shield, let's say I have these different notes where I want to be able to do something different. We have baseline 1 is the upper arc, but we also have another way to do stretching to fill. So we stretch the fill for letters 4, and that's what it's done right now. So this top thing where it stretches to fill this, you can also just have, instead of that, you can have that just follow the arc that's up there instead of stretching to fill that entire area. So in this case, right now it's set to stretch to fill. If I change these letters to something short, let's just say I use the word half. Why not? If I can actually write that. The word half, if I do that, it's going to stretch out really wide. Well, why is it going to do that? Because it's set to use that stretch to fill. But if we go check the notes on this piece, it's got all these different options on it. Well, I also have this arc that's at the top, and that would be LC1. And so if I go here to my letters object and I change this to LC1, now it just follows the arc at the top. And if I start to write anything more, let's say I actually wanted to write half back up here, well, now it follows that arc. Or if I don't like the arc and I'm like, you know what, it was better stretched, I can go back here again, attach this to letters 4, and now it's going to stretch to the piece. So this stuff is super great for in-house customizations. It's super great for handling stuff you're going to do over and over again. And certainly, is it good for fun stuff? Yeah, of course it is. This is great for fun stuff. And in fact, it's great for all the fun stuff I showed you previously too. And in fact, I've done lots of different options for this type stuff and stuff that you may have not seen yet. You may see some other time from me down the road. The truth of the matter is, there's all sorts of options that we might enjoy for this stuff, right? There's all kinds of options that you might enjoy to get this stuff put together, right? So in any case, like I said, templating, there's multiple reasons to use it. I'm not going to say that you have to go crazy on it, but it is something where I think it's useful. And honestly, I'm going to show you a couple more things once I get my screen share back up here. But yeah, I think it's something that's worth thinking about. The other great thing is you can also do, like, let's say we've got Lisa's collection that she's releasing, and I'm going to go ahead and put this up very soon. You'll see this from the Brilliance blog coming up real soon. Has all these other different little icons here. You've got pie slice, little salt and pepper shakers, spoon and fork, and I've got some other stuff here, but I'm just going to go ahead and grab our pie slice here. And if we go back to that green bean casserole, the great thing is I can paste that in here. If I cut that back out, I can grab this design. And if especially if I'm in Stitch Artist, I can go ahead and just paste, replace it. And I've got it right on top of there. Or I can grab this piece, paste it on top, and then we go back, grab out our little casserole dish, drop it out, and now we have something where certainly I don't want green bean casserole pie, but I can go back here and change up my lettering very quickly and be able to make something cool and have different options for people on hand. And I think for the holidays especially, this is stuff that we might really enjoy using. This is something that's useful. So like I said, this is something that you can do for anything in-house, anything outside. I think it's worthwhile. Plus, you don't know when you'll have a special shape. Now, certainly it can be the fun stuff, but it can literally be like this, where you need to match a certain arc. You're trying to fit it on a particular garment in a certain way, and you just want to have that there. It doesn't always have to be fun shapes. Can it be fun shapes? Absolutely can be fun shapes. It can be great stuff, even if we're doing stuff that is for, normal athletics, normal team sports. We can use this to make something interesting, right? It doesn't have to always be simple. It doesn't have to always be complicated. And certainly, as you guys know, you can go crazy with it. You guys know that we did that for the Ace collection, Ace 1, the Rewind. And that's something that I've always enjoyed, is this kind of layout. This got really popular for, a couple years here. We've been still seeing this popping up once in a while, where you're seeing people doing these real crazy kind of psychedelic layouts, Fillmore poster style. This stuff is super awesome. And honestly, I think this is still useful. And if you can provide this to a customer and show them the different options, honestly, this is always something wonderful to start from. If you're having concept creep, if you're having your ideas aren't gelling together, being able to stop and do this kind of work with templating down the road is very useful. And buying these templates when it makes sense for having these different styles, available, and being able to offer these to customers is helpful too. But so why would you use these templates? Well, for one thing, these are fun to put little phrases in, but it's not like we can't use these for club names, company names, event names, anything like that. And certainly you're going to do names plus sports stuff. That's coming up. It's going to happen. You're going to make varsity stuff. You're going to do some resort wear stuff. And certainly this could just as easily be a school design. Obviously, this is taken from the standard varsity layout that we all know and love. And it would take me no time at all to grab our Eldorado Eagle and plop that in the middle of that thing and have this be correct and right for any sports team immediately. So like I said, these things are useful. templates can be used for all of the above. Isn't just fun stuff. It's not just, the stuff that you've seen before, and it can be on multi-layer images. Again, like I said, if we're sitting here and we're looking at the stuff we've done before, I'll go ahead and show you once again the piece from Patch Artist, where we have those ones that Lisa did for us in our sports patches. We have these really great simple layouts where we've got names and they're in with a fully embroidered piece. So this is something that's customizable, really quick, easy to get. So yeah, we do have a comment here. We have from Barb says, are the templates available as a pack and purchase from Brilliance? The ones I'm just showing you right now are from Patch Artist. Those are in the Patch Artist setup. The other template from Lisa is coming to you free very shortly. The other volleyball stuff is not there yet. Patch Artist has all that stuff in it. So go into the Patch Artist libraries and you're going to find these little sports templates. And in fact, the other one you're going to find that I did, which I really enjoyed, were, and I'll go ahead and show these to you as well while we're here, because I can. And oh, by the way, these are from the Ace 1, the Rewind pack from Brilliance. If you buy the pack, you can use it with the Express mode. It doesn't require other software. You don't have to have other software just to use it with the fonts that come with it and the templates that come with it. You won't be able to make new templates. New templates are a Stitch Artist thing, but you will be able to use those if you don't have any other software from us and you just buy that, you can. But here's the thing I'm going to say. I'm going to show you one other set that I did, just to kind of show you one other thing that I did coming directly out of my needs for doing sports stuff. And that was another thing that's in this Patch Artist setup is we had these varsity sport patches. And these varsity sport patches are literally directly out of a need that I had to make these pieces. They've got some just standard sports stuff. So it's just a varsity basketball and that stuff like that. However, I also have these ones that were explicitly made because I used to have to drop numbers in these pieces. I used to have to go in there and drop number 22 in this piece. And right here, it's in fire, and have it stretch to fit these patches. This is something I did over and over and over again. And when I first did this, I didn't have any templating available to me. So when I would make these things, I had to stretch the lettering to fit in it every single time. And honestly, when you have a 1, yes, it stretches weird, then you have to center that out. Of course you do. But every other thing from, 13 to 99 and up to 100 still looks pretty good and stretches really nicely. So the thing is, it really gets most of our patches done very well without having to alter anything. But if you do have something like the 1, the great thing is you can just do that same thing I talked about before and flag it, and it'll still stretch vertically, or you can stretch it horizontally and make whatever fit that you want to do. But at the same time, for almost everything I do, for most of the numbers on the team, invariably, I was doing these 2-number setups where I was having to warp these all the time to fit in. And of course, like the others, we do have interactive options and notes that tell you how to use this. And like I said, we can also do letter C2, not to stretch it horizontally in the same way. And so the great thing is you can stop it or change it. And you can also size this up ahead of time, enter your 1. And then when it warps, if you go ahead and center that out, you get yourself a much more normal size setup. So the great thing is we have options for it. We have directions for how to do it. And that's something that I did so that other folks would not have to do the things I was doing all the time. That kind of layout, though, you can set it up once for yourself. Or if you have a special layout where you're doing constant sets of 2-line, 3-number setups, or it has multiple different things in it that are not numbers, you make that alteration to the template once with Stitch Artist, and then you have that forever, even if you have a specialty need that is not standard. And in fact, that's where it's really powerful, is where you have something weird, where you don't do something that other people do, where you don't want to use layouts that are built into your software. Because, I mean, certainly there are layouts built into all softwares, but there's not always the same kinds, and there's not always the same stuff. So anyway, that's what I'm talking about templating today. I'm going to leave it at that. That was more than I probably intended to do. But we'll go ahead and kind of leave that there and just say templates are useful. You can do other things with them. So hopefully folks will understand that these are available and that you can make templates yourself. And they're very easy to do, because it can be just as simple as typing something out ahead of time so that you can replace it and saving a master version of it. All right, folks, with that, let's go ahead and go back to, the rest of our topics today. I'll try and run through these a little faster. Knockdown and nap-tacking. All right, so one thing I'm just going to mention, as you guys know, there's a trademark on Knockdown. I know I'm talking a lot of Embrilliance stuff today, but this is really where a lot of the questions I've been getting lately are coming from the Embrilliance crew. It's for people or people who own multiple softwares who also own Embrilliance. They're asking me some questions about that. Also, the word Knockdown is actually a trademark of Embrilliance specifically. So if you see Knockdown stitches somewhere else, they're misusing it. The term Knockdown is actually a trademark that we own. But other nap-tacking stitches are also kind of in this same boat. And I just wanted to talk very briefly about nap-tacking stitches because it's something that I'm not going to say it frustrates me necessarily, but here's the thing. Nap-tacking stitches are there for a very particular reason, and I keep on seeing them used for other things that they really don't make sense for, and it's not that I think you can't use things for other means. If you want to use tools to do other stuff with those tools, I do it all the time. I use tools to get from one place to the next. I use shape building. I use all kinds of weird stuff and jam them together. I move from different softwares back and forth to get what I want. Sometimes I'm importing vector that I've done some process on in the vector software and then running it into digitizing software to get where I'm going. So like I said, it's not something that it's really a necessary thing to say that, you're using the tool wrong. I'm not trying to say you're using the tool wrong. What I do think is that people, when they're using nap-tacking stitches or knockdown stitches in order to push down nap, to push down fuzz or nap when we're in a design, they're doing it kind of in the wrong way, right? They're using it for something that either it doesn't make sense, they're not just pushing down nap, or they're expecting it to do something that it really isn't made to do. The biggest thing I usually see people doing is trying to put a big color field behind something, which really should be done if you're going to do it with a fill stitch, very often with fill stitch with a border on it, in fact. Now, can we use those tools to get there? If we have the right tools, we can. But the thing is, when we're talking about knockdown specifically from Embrilliance or any other nap-tacking stitches, they're going to have some similar problems when you use them in a way that contrasts with the background, right? So when we're doing our best work with a knockdown stitch or a nap-tacking stitch, what we're trying to do is really make it sink into the background. That's the point of these things, right? They're here to sink into the background. A really great nap-tacking stitch should look like this, right? It should sink into the background. It should be a similar color to the background. Barb's telling me Wilcom calls it lay down stitches. Yeah, everybody's had to come up with new names because because knockdown is a trademark. The thing I'm going to say is, whatever you call it, this formulation that's on this particular picture is before I got to contribute my bidirectional knockdown to our actual Embrilliance knockdown. So this was back when I used to call it the light mesh fill. But the thing is, it's very light. It's not super dense. Even if I zoom in, yes, you can see a little of it, but it's very light. It's not super dense. I did not use any other material for support underneath it. You generally don't need to. Sometimes a super fine detailing would be helpful, but you're looking right now at a very nice thick towel, and here is straight stitch detail, and there is no other support material. There is no solvay. There is no other sort of upper topper underneath this. It is just that bidirectional knockdown, but in this case, it was made individually in two fills as a laydown stitch, like you said, but it was done as the light mesh fill. That's what I used to call it, just a light mesh fill that was laid behind everything before the trademark knockdown. And the original knockdown was just one unidirectional fill. I'm going to show you two kinds of knockdown. I'm going to show you the problem people keep running into with it. And I'm just going to kind of state for the record, the best use for a knockdown stitch is for it to be fairly light in density and for it to be the same color as the garment it's going on. It is there specifically to physically hold back the fill, right? That's what I'm going to say. And like I said, it's something that everybody kind of knows. We know what it is. We've seen it. We understand what it is. But at the same time, it is something where I think people are kind of misusing it a lot to try and use it to offset something, to put a background behind something, to, make something happen where it is trying to hold down, not just trying to hold down stitches, but it's trying to offset color. It's an outline, it's a border, it's something else. When you're doing that and you're using a contrasting stitch color, you usually see problems like with visible travel stitching, or you just don't like the quality of the fill you're getting. And it's because you don't really have any control over it. And what you really need is to digitize a fill. I am going to show you some options and some things that I think people are actually looking to do. I'm going to do it specifically in Embrilliance because that's where I'm at. But at the same time, this is something you do with any lay down stitch. You usually can grab that object and then change things about it if you have digitizing software, but if you don't have digitizing software, using it as a way to make a colored background is really not the way to handle that thing. It's not what it's for, and especially using it with its existing settings, right? And that's, like I said, it's something that certainly can be changed. It's something that, like I said, I've talked about this a million times. It's not something you necessarily need to cover a million times over. At the same time, I've talked about it before. I've done this way back in the day, pre my Brilliance days. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and give you, because we have a question that I think is useful here from DJ Kev. He says, the only question I have on Knockdown is what stitch length works best for the fill bidirectional? My stitch length here, and I think I've got it listed. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. I'll just go ahead and give you the entire article about my original stitch length settings. Now, what I'm going to tell you is, though they're slightly altered for density, the bidirectional fill or bidirectional knockdown in Brilliance is based on mine. Slightly altered, slightly different, a little bit different. Brian has some different settings used for it, but it's very similar. And you can set it to the same settings if you want, because it actually has alterable settings. It is available. I'm going to go ahead and throw this link into the comments here, and I'll go ahead and throw a banner because I know that a lot of people say they don't see the comments later on, depending on what platform you're on. Go ahead and throw a banner down here. This is what we're looking at, but I'll go ahead and throw this up here for you. Taming texture. This is a really old, article of mine, but it has some of these examples on it where, like, this is on a wristband. They're super thick and loopy and horrible. And just a really basic light mesh fill fixed all that. We're looking at these super heavy towels, and that's just underlay fixed that. So that isn't even really the light mesh fill. And you can use it to make embossing, which is something you can do. However, that's not the knockdown tool. This is using the light mesh fill as a setting for fill stitches, and you're going to do that in digitizing software. And it still has to be tonal for it to really look its best, because you're going to see travel stitches inside of that. We're going to talk about that again in a second. So if we go back up here, though, I do have my settings for it, and I'm using 3 to 4 millimeter stitch length. I tend to go long when I can, but a little bit shorter will probably make it hide better. And it also depends on the material and the thread that you're using. So as you're saying, your question is about the stitch length. It does somewhat depend on the material, the thread you're using. It makes sense to kind of think about that ahead of time, because the thread you're using is going to be more visible if it is shiny on a rough surface. And so many times this is on toweling, right? If it's on toweling, if it's on faux fur, depending on how shiny that faux fur is, you probably want something that doesn't have as much shine. A matte finish thread's going to look better. Can you use standard thread? Absolutely. Did it all the time. And several of these pieces that you're looking at here, they do have it. However, specifically for this article, I remember distinctly for the article that I was particularly trying to get this laydown to work. Now, pardon me, folks. I've got something going on with my software here real quick. Let's go ahead and go to my other screen share, and I'll pull down the comment for a second so we can see what's going on. Like I said, EV Mux has been acting up today. I apologize. But let's go ahead and pull these banners off the screen so I can show you what I'm talking about. If we look at this logo here and the design that's in it, I used light on a very off-centered way to kind of try and show the stitching, because you really don't see it very much. But when light is kind of obliquely hitting it, depending on where you're looking at this garment, when you're using normal polyester thread, you can see the thread. Like a shine can appear. So we're looking at this thread here on the Santa Fe piece. You can see it. If we look at this piece, there's little tiny winks of light. Now, the material that was being used for this wristband is not as matte or as dull, perhaps, as the other material. But we see how invisible this piece is. It just looks like texture on the towel. That's because I was actually using sewing thread. I was using a polyester core sewing thread that had a little bit of fuzz to it. And that worked better for me. When you use very shiny threads, you can see them in that mesh a little bit. And in fact, when we're looking at our embossed piece here, where we're not trying at all, we have some contrast and it's much denser. You can use it for embossing in this way. You can also make it invisible if you want to, if you want just an invisible debossed look like this. But for this piece, I went ahead and did contrast and didn't worry about it. But we go back up once again to the black Santa Fe piece here. You can see that if you have like the light coming from an angle, sometimes there's a little bit of shine, and longer stitches are going to be like that. The problem is if you go too short with the stitches, then the detail that's laying on top might want to sink in. So if you have super short stitches for your knockdown, depending on how tight you go on those, you can kind of sink into the divots where the stitch penetration points are. It's not a tremendous amount, but I like them a little longer, loftier, and they run faster. So 3 to 4 is where I usually land. 3.5 is fine. You can use different settings to make that work the way you like it, and certainly it's something where you might want to take a look at how it's working for you, and depending on how that's working for you, it should be okay. Anyway, so let's see if we can get my scenes back up. I don't know if you guys are still seeing me. We're having some connecting. I've had a couple connecting issues here. Hopefully we're going to stay all right. Like I said, we've been seeing some issues. I don't know if it's weather related or other stuff's going on, but certainly had some stuff going on with our EV Mux today and not necessarily being super happy. Okay, folks, sorry about that. Still having some issues with the EV Mux. Hopefully you guys are still seeing me and everything's going okay. So we have a comment from Frank here. I'll bring this up. Hopefully it's coming up all right for you guys. Frank says, on white towels, I like to use silver. It gives a nice contrast. Yeah, if you want a little sparkle, it can be great. I think the real problem is that it doesn't always look as good as you might want it to look sometimes. And I think this is the deal. I'll show you the pieces. Hopefully you can see it. I'm just going to tell you guys, for me, my screen is partially grayed out. So hopefully we can still go through this. I'm going to try and finish up here. It's probably not going to be as long as I would like to. DJ Kev says, I had a baby mink style blanket I'd use the Knockdown for. Yeah, that's minky style. Sometimes, depending on how shiny this stuff is, then you might be happier using something like a standard poly. But, like I said, it really depends on the sheen of the material itself. I would grab yourself a sample if you can. What I like to do, you can get minky style blanket materials in the home store. You can do that. You can go get fabric samples for that, or get yourself a spare blanket and test some stuff out. Because I think that absolutely testing out what kind of thread looks best is good for doing that for knockdowns. So like I said, knockdowns, you can do different setups. I am going to just go ahead and briefly show you in software what I'm talking about when we're saying, sometimes people are having issues with contrast. So let's just really quickly pull that up and just show you that. And we'll see. If I keep having the technical problems I'm having, guys, I may go ahead and not do the last little section. I was going to talk about, at the end here, I was going to talk about some name drop stuff, but that might actually have to stop if I can't get my virtual preview to come back up here. So hopefully I can get that back up, but I'm going to try and show you this stuff anyway, and we'll see how this fares with you guys. Okay, so let me just try and show you this really quickly. So as we can see, if I zoom out, you can see it a little bit better because I got white text and green here. Thing is, these are kind of standard knockdowns. So I'll go ahead and grab this piece out. I'll copy out my text here so we can have a look at what I'm talking about when we're using the automated knockdown tool. So here is our connected script here. Very classic. You'll see this, all over the place in all manner of uses, from the old school embroidery software where it used to be kind of based on the old Meistergram fonts. I remade a new version of this called Connected Script that actually brings that into a more modern connotation, has modern characters in it, and does automatic linkages between the letters. But in this case, we have a great old name. We have Hansel here, so little Hans. We've got a name for that. And the thing is, if you're applying a knockdown, when you're doing this in Brilliance, you're going to have this automatic add knockdown stitching setup over here under utility, and you're going to have these options here. You have your density options. These are in millimeters, not points in this case. We have stitch length. We have inflation, so how much inflation we have around the piece. For the shape, we can reset our defaults if we need to. And then there's also bidirectional or unidirectional. You'll see the density is a little lighter on bidirectional. And certainly this density is a little tighter than the density I would use in my own settings. You now have those from the article if you'd like to adjust them directly to my settings that I tend to use. However, the thing to kind of notice is the original knockdown was like this. You would get a piece like this where we had this kind of regular central 45-degree fill. It is a light mesh fill, or a light fill. Whereas if you wanted to do that with the bidirectional, then you check that out. Once again, utility, add knockdown stitching, bidirectional is checked. Then you really do get a light mesh fill that's very similar to what I would do, and it travels the edges. And it is bidirectional, and it does actually set the auto start and end in such a way that it travels back and forth. And by the way, Lisa, absolutely correct. She says, nice font for stockings. Yeah, made to that purpose. It is to match all the old school stockings. That is what that is for. So if you guys are looking for a stocking font, Connecting Script in Embroidered Essentials is specifically that font that everybody's been looking for stockings that was done. I believe that's a Pottery Barn one, but honestly, they took it from the old school stuff that was being done for from Meistergram fonts, so it is very similar. Let's go ahead and grab that back up for just a second. We'll talk about what we're talking about. So the thing that I keep seeing people do is they're trying to take this piece. So let's take this back out. We'll show these two examples again. So here's our Hansel, right? And they're going to take this piece and they're not trying to put this on a green background. They've got themselves a nice white garment, or maybe they got like a yellow garment and they're going to put they wanted to put a green background for some reason behind the text. And so they grab this thing, they add a knockdown, and if they use the single direction fill, well, what do they have here? They've got these travel stitches. You can see if I zoom in on these that there are travel stitches. Of course, it's a fill. It's a complex fill. It's going to travel. And if we have these insets that don't fit exactly with the stitch angle, then they're going to have some travel where we go back and forth and try and fill beyond the stitch angle. Especially, let's say we had something that sticks out beyond a certain part of the shape. It's going to have to travel in and travel out. It's just the way it's going to happen. We are going to see that travel stitches, and the more contrast you have, the more visible the travel stitching is going to be. And somebody will say, well, change the starts and the ends. Well, the starts and the ends are pretty much optimal for where this stitch angle is. There's really nothing much to change here. And honestly, I can play with stitch angle if I have this in digitizing software and maybe I get a better result. There we go. Maybe I can get it to not do that. So if you have Stitch Artist, you can play with it, but now I've changed the angle. And depending on the stitch angles that are present in the actual font itself, you might find that like with this Hansel here, let me grab the Hansel text. And if I drag the Hansel text and put it back on top of this logo, well, or of this background, like I'm trying to make it like a background logo, these lines are now matching up with the angles in Hansel, and it's going to pull those apart, and it's not necessarily going to lay down as well, especially on a single angle. So that might not really work for you, right? So that can be an issue, even if you're going to change it. Plus, if you don't have digitizing tools, you don't have access to this. If you're using the automated tools, this is what you have. You're not going to change the angles. If you do have digitizing tools, then you can change those angles, but then we still have this really loose wash of a fill. If you're trying to use it for a actual background element, well, then you probably want a more dense fill than that. The thing is, if you are a Stitch Artist user, if you have digitizing software, then you can change it. But then there really isn't a reason to use the automated knockdown tool so much as you could use inflation or something else. But let's say you did have that, then you could ostensibly come in here, change your density down, and you could also then grab this piece, copy it, paste it, maybe add yourself a satin border, or certainly something thinner than that. I'm not going to go through a bunch of work to make it perfect, but then you could make something like that for yourself. So if you did want to do that, that's great. But now we're in the kind of realm of digitizing, and this is not something that's part of automated knockdown. This is something else. And also, I wouldn't use these settings for that fill anyway. I'd have to be changing a bunch of settings. And frankly, I'm probably going to clean up a little bit of the shapes. So can you do something using the knockdown tool to make your initial shape? Yes. Is that something that you want to do for using a knockdown tool necessarily? No. And you have to have digitizing software after the fact to do the rest of that work anyway. You could then do automatic borders. You could then use any other sort of automated tools on this, or you can digitize your own background for it. But the thing is, people will largely, like I said, they're not doing any of this. They're just making knockdown. And then they're getting unhappy when it doesn't look exactly like they expect it to do for offsetting color. It's not meant for that. It is meant to hide away. Now, certainly, bidirectional knockdown, you're going to see it doesn't have the same amount of travel stitch trouble. Why? Because it travels the edge. Now, the problem is if you have a lot of contrast with your colors, you're going to notice, and now it may not be that bad contrasting, or it might not bother you very much because the edges of a travel edge fill do get butted up against the edge and get a little dense. But you're going to see that there's travel along the edge. And in the case of this shape for Hansel, you'll see that travels all around the upper edge of that piece, which means it'll have a darker outline right there. And so what people sometimes say is, why is my shape outlined? It's not outlined. There is a dark travel stitch outline there that is part of the edge travel that happens with complex fills like this. So the edge travel is traveling along that edge. And it won't necessarily be the same if I start changing parts of it. I can certainly work with these starts and ends, but the starts and ends have to shape because these are actually two different shapes that are starting and ending at different sides so that they path to one direction and path the other direction in a uniform way. Will it be perfect? No matter how much alteration I do to make this exactly what I might want it to be, even if I make it perfectly from one side to the other and exactly how we see it, you're going to have some sort of travel at the edges. It will be visible. And so what lots of people do is then they start doing weird stuff trying to trace the edges or something else with another tool. You can do that. But like I said, just because you zoom out farther than the real thickness of thread and it looks kind of like a background Doesn't mean it's a background. If you're going to use this tool to do this, you're going to have digitizing software as well, and then go create an actual fill with a border or whatever it is that you want to get the edges. Because even the other thing people will say is they just don't like a raw edge fill. So even if they do get into their digitizing software, they do reset this where they end up with, nicer densities, and they end up, they go in, grab their underlays, grab themselves, a more complete underlay because they're on something that's maybe a little bit fuzzy or dense or what have you. Even if they do that, you're going to find that sometimes they don't like the edges of the fill or the way it's laid out. And so now they really do have to get into creating a second offset or creating a border. Still super easy to do. But at the same time, the thing is, people are often not wanting to go to the step of doing any sort of digitizing work on it, and they're just dropping the automated underlay in there and unhappy that it doesn't look like a fill. Well, it's not intended to. The proper use, or definitely the intended use, is, as we see here, to be out of the way. Knockdown is meant to knock down the nap for fabric to make it look better to run on top of with small details. So really, that is kind of where we are. It's not necessarily something that we can leave to just that tool to make it work. We are going to want to do some other control work on it. Certainly, like I said, I'm glad I got a chance to drop this link for you. If you want to see my particular settings for doing a light mesh fill, then go ahead and use that link. You're going to find my particular settings. You can enter those settings into the Brilliance Knockdown as well. Just remember that when you're converting if you're converting back and forth between points and millimeters, that an embroidery point is 1/10 of a millimeter. That's all you really need to know to convert back and forth between these different systems. If you're using a point-based digitizing software, or we are point-based for most of our settings in Brilliance, not all. In Wilcom, they use millimeters for everything, but it is the same measurement system, really. In all honesty, because embroidery points are 1/10 of a millimeter, it's still a metric system that's going on. And lo and behold, while we're here, since I'll just go ahead and say it, also, howdy from Sydney, says Brendan Prasner from over there at Wilcom. So thanks, Brendan, for showing up. But yeah, we're just going to talk about functions and talking about things that are there. So Knockdown, like in Brilliance has, or other nap-tacking. People kind of have a tendency to use it for stuff that it's not necessarily working. I'm glad, by the way, that we're seeing it all good. I apologize. Unfortunately for me, the problem I'm having is I am now flying blind. I cannot see at all my preview. So it means that I'm doing all of this hoping that it's showing to you the way that I expect it to, and I can't see the compositing or anything. I'm currently completely flying blind. In fact, doing all of that layout stuff. If you saw me looking over to another screen, I apologize. I'm doing this entirely without being able to look at the piece that I want to look at. So it's kind of a hardship. We may have to go ahead and call it for the day, and I might have to come back to you guys with some content about the other stuff I wanted to talk about. As you guys know, I had intended to talk about name drop stuff. I think I'm going to try it very quickly. I'll try and just show you one option and just give you the kind of setup for fixing a name drop when something is typed incorrectly. I will say that it is not ideal. So the first thing I want to say is, though it is something you can do to fix this stuff, so we'll go ahead and talk about this briefly. We'll see if this works out. I'm going to try and do this without having the ability to see what I'm doing here. But name drops, if you do type them incorrectly, if something goes wrong and you have some of a name there that you can keep and some that you can tear out, the problem I'm going to tell you is almost invariably when you rip out letters, the quality of what's left on the garment is just almost always horrible. There are going to be some holes. Even on a knit, even when you steam it, in the best way that you can, you cut things out carefully. Absolutely just going to let you know that you are going to see holes. There are going to be things that disturb the garment when you run needles through it. Just the way it's going to be. So the truth of the matter is, it's just not necessarily the best option all the time. So what I'm going to tell you guys is, yes, you can take out individual letters. Yes, you can take out the end of a name and replace it. It is possible. I want you to always question yourself when you are doing this for a client, especially on apparel. Is it really of a quality that is worthwhile and okay to give someone? Is it something that you would consider first quality? If you're providing the garment, if it's readily available, if you can get something else, something to replace that garment, almost always the right call is to just replace the garment. And I know that sucks, and I know you don't want to hear it, and I never want to say it, but I reserve doing this kind of work, dropping in text, fixing things for heirlooms, for customer supply that cannot be replaced, or for personal projects. And that's where the love of the thing is worth more to me than otherwise. The other times I might do it, I have done this to add text to things that do accept ripping out pretty readily. Felt will take that pretty decently if you have to. I've had to correct, I've corrected text on chenille lettering and felt patches done for letter jackets where the chenille was handcrafted, where somebody hand ran the chenille and I didn't want to waste the entirety of a hand chenille. They used a chain stitch machine to hand run all of the moss stitching. And that's something where I didn't want to lose the entirety of the handwork that was done by the chenille artist. Then I did that. So heirlooms, things like that. I've done it on big felt blankets for Pendleton blankets, things like that. I've done this on things that you cannot replace. And I've done this on some materials that work well. On a polo shirt, I wouldn't do it. On a t-shirt, pretty much never. On a jacket, really depends on how bad the holes are that are left behind. So before I say anything else, let's just say dropping in satin stitch text in an area where you've already run some, even after you steam it, it's usually not of a quality that is worth putting out your door. Your own garment, do what you will. Do what you will. So, like I said, lots of other people are talking about, by the way, you guys are also being very kind to me about the issues I'm having technically right now. And still, I can't see the output. So you guys just have to believe that I am doing this layout blind. Lisa says, yikes. That just shows you how much you know this since I'm blindfolded. Yep, this is true. Speaks with Tulip says, can't see no problems. Glad you guys can see it. I'm hoping it'll work out. Marianne says, I agree. I will no longer rip out designs or letters. The other thing is ripping out designs, unless you made a mistake, if somebody brings you a tear out, it's just not worth it. Make a patch, sew a patch on, heat press a patch on, and charge accordingly. Geez, it's just not it. Doug says, I order extra just in case. Lots of people do. Lots of people order for overages, depending on what kind of garment business you're in. Anywhere up to 3% sometimes can be a normal overage order. Now that's kind of crazy these days. People do more just-in-time ordering and they do more low repeat like that, but it's something to think about. All right, so let's just very briefly, because I think it's a worthwhile thing, we'll talk about name drops and do-overs. I'm not going to go into drawing and objects. We ran a little long anyway, and this is hard enough as it is, but I do want to very briefly just give you a layout, and I'm going to do this in Embrilliance because it's slightly different in other software. I'm just going to show you very briefly how I would lay extra lettering onto it, something once it was done correctly, because this is the very specific question I got. Now, I will also show you very briefly how I did it in Wilcom's a little different, but it's a very similar process. The thing is, it's really about just knowing where you are on a design to make it work, right? So here's the concept, right? Let's just say that I have absolutely no idea how to spell the name Barney. So this is it, right? I have gone in or let's say this is somebody else in my crew, because this is what usually happened to me is we would allow our embroidery folks in the production space to do name drops sometimes, and every once in a while they would come back with a name drop where somebody was very well-meaning and over the phone took an order or added an extra jacket in for the balloon fiesta, and somebody had a name they wanted to drop on it, and they did it incorrectly. So this is not how you spell Barney in any conventional way, but this is maybe how they thought it was spelled. And they didn't check it with somebody. They didn't get the approvals. And so here we are. And by the way, if you guys want to know, you always ask. This is Ace Cider from the Ace 1 to Rewind package for Embrilliance. So if you want to go check that out, that's what this font is Ace Cider. All right. So we're looking at Ace Cider. We've got this thing here, and it says Barney. And we're like, you know what? That was supposed to be Barney with an EY. Okay, I've already stitched this on. What I'm thinking is, EY is a little longer, but it's not going to mess up the layout too hard. I'm going to pull this I and E out. It's just big satin stitches. There's not a lot of little tiny points on this. It's not a scripty font that comes down to small points. It doesn't have a lot of overlaps. I think it's going to tear out okay, and I only need to do an I and an E. There's not even a lot of overlapped shapes on this, so it's not even as bad as the N. I'm going to tear out the I and the E and put in an E and a Y. So let's just imagine that the garment we're using, this works out. We're on something that has a lovely piece. And by the way, yes, I agree, Doug, 100%. Get a text file for names or do a setup ahead of time, like I showed you earlier with that big sheet of names for ARVC. You want to show somebody this layout ahead of time and get it done. It is absolutely something you should do. But Let's say we didn't. Let's say we've accidentally done this, or that we have the other thing that happens is we have a team mom, team dad, team sponsor who has gotten all the names for us, and we get our magical text file and they messed it up. And now they're trying to ask us to get back this garment, and they bought one that fit just one person that was a special garment that you couldn't find the size for. And here we are, we're stuck, right? We've got this garment. It tore out all right. Everything looks fine. What are we going to do to make this work? Well, the thing is, we have to have a good frame of reference, and we have to have a starting point from that frame of reference. We want to be able to register this with the original name. Now, if you're lucky, this gets caught while you're still in the hoop. If so, leave it in the hoop. If not, the next big hurdle is you're going to have to hoop this thing super straight. So grab your hoop arms. One of the best things you can do is take your hoop arms, throw a ruler across the bottom of your bottom hoop arm, if the name will fit in this position, and then line up the original name with that ruler, holding it against the two arms of the hoop. That gives you a solid straight line across this piece. Now, if you're on a modern embroidery machine that has rotation, or you can use stickers or something else like that in order to set rotation, you can do other things, but I'm going to show you the most low-tech version that we used to do, because it is something you do outside in the hoop, and it's a lot easier. You take your two hoop arms, you line a ruler up against the bottom of them so that you have a specific drop line across it, and you line up the bottom edge of this name with that ruler, and you press your hoop in, or you use your magnetic hoop, whatever you got to do. That's the most low-tech version of this thing that you can do. Otherwise, if you had the ability to rotate, it might get a little harder when you're on the machine, but at least you could rotate in the machine and align it. If you have like computer vision alignment, it might be easier there too, because then you can use the camera vision to line this thing up exactly, and I'll show you, because we're going to have the other portion of the name. But if we're doing it super low tech, so we're on an old school commercial machine, we are not using any sort of rotation, we are just using what we have here, then what we're going to do is we're going to stop and type in first our name as it's supposed to be. We're going to say, all right, Barney is actually supposed to be EY. So, and you're going to notice, yeah, it messes it up a little bit. It's going to move it in the field, but that's not such a concern. Remember, right now, the word barn is laid out. And by the way, I like this idea too. Barb says, I use painter's tape to line up times as a guide. Totally. You can use painter's tape and then line that up with the edges. Or if you've got a hoop that has markings on the edge, some do, and the Durkee hoops do, that can be useful too. But yeah, this is the most low-tech version of it. I'm teaching you that one because it's the one that I know everybody can do. So we line that up. We're going to say, all right, it's supposed to be EY. So what am I going to do? I need this EY, right? But what am I going to do first? And I'll show you this. I'm actually going to back this out a little bit. We're going to say, all right, so I've done this. I've typed my Barney. It's not IE anymore. I know that what's left there is just barn, right? So what did I do? First thing I do, I type out my Barney, right? So let's say I've done this, and I'll go back this all the way up and say, this is our Barney, right? So we know we need to have just this EY. Well, what we want to do, let's go ahead and let's do this. We'll put in Barney again, because we want the entire one to make absolutely sure we're lined up. This is Barney, and we want it to line up with the original. So what are we going to do? We're going to go ahead and say, all right, I want to line up the BARN right here. I want to make sure it lines up at the N. Why? We're going to use this N for our starting point. We're going to say, all right, if I want this to work, I have an N here, and I want that N to be the starting point. I'm going to line this thing up. I'm going to grab this guy here, and we're going to do a really tight alignment and say, all right, stitch for stitch. I want especially this N. I want the R and the N, stitch for stitch, to line right up. I'm going to grab that little yellow text. And I'm going to make sure that stitch for stitch, this thing is dead on. And I used a different color so that I can see it. And once it lines up and everything is set, we're like, okay, that's what we have, right? But the thing is, we can't use it like this yet. So what we actually need to do is just get those last two letters, because you're going to do this, and what's going to happen? Well, when you delete barn, no matter how you lay it out, even if you right justify it, it's going to move on you again. So don't do that. Type out your Barney first, right? So we've got our Barney typed out, and then we want to line up just our EY. Oops, I grabbed it wrong. Well, I'm not able to see what I'm doing here real well. I'm going to grab that yellow text, and we're going to line up that EY with the existing EY, right? So if I grab my yellow text here, I can grab this, and I'm going to say, okay, I have that EY lined up exactly. Now it's just right. That's just the EY by itself. You're going to say, how do I make sure it starts in the right position? Well, if you're in Embrilliance, what I'm going to let you know is when you save DST files, you can save them off center. So the thing to look at is when we look at a hoop, we've got a hoop in space here. So we've got our 0, 0 line. That is where the original center usually is, and that's where it usually centers designs. But in the DST file, we can actually set it to not center when we save this out. And what it'll do is the starting point will be this 0, 0 point on the field. So what you're going to notice I've done is I've picked something I can lay out. When I first laid this out, and I'll go ahead and take this away for a second so you can see it, I was like, well, what on that end is going to be easy for me to drop in? And I thought, this little juncture here, the place where these two columns meet, is a place that's going to be pretty sharp, pretty easy for me to see, and I'm going to be able to line that up pretty closely. So yes, on the stitch out, it might be a little thinner, it might be a little in, a little out, but the pull compensation shouldn't be so much on the garment I'm working on that I'm going to be more than, 0.13 of a millimeter off from my exact lineup. I need some sort of corner, some point, and I don't want to use a point right on the edge of like the serif because that will pull in a little bit. And we know from push compensation, it'll come out a little bit. Push distortion will push the top of that line out. I want to use something where I don't think there'll be a lot of distortion. And for me, I find like the inside corners of the E like we have here, this little corner on the end is a good spot. So what I've done is I've taken my 0, center mark from the hoop in Brilliance, and I've taken my Barney text and I lined up the end right here. Why? Because I'm going to start my needle right there, my first starting point of the needle. When I go 0, on my commercial machine where I get that started, I'm going to start the point right here. Why? Because you're going to see once I have my text here, all I have to do, I'm going to go ahead and get this fully lined up. I'll have my yellow text lined up exactly where it's supposed to be. And then I'll go ahead and show you this really quickly. And once again, like I said, we're having a little bit of technical issues. I'll try and go ahead and get this lined up best I can without seeing everything on screen while you can see it. All right, so this is lined up exactly. I've got that there. I'm going to go ahead and delete that original text. Now you can see my 0, point is where that N is going to be, where that little juncture in the N is. And I would save this. But I do want to make sure you understand if you're in Brilliance that you're going to go into your preferences. And under conversion, under DST, you're going to take off the center on open and save. You don't want those to be checked. So return on origin, you can if you want to return to the origin, but center on open and save you don't want, because what you're going to end up with is actually a DST file. I believe I have it saved. No, I don't have it up here. I will go ahead and save it out and show it to you really quickly. If we have the DST version of that, we would save this stitch file as, we would get ourselves this fixed DST, and actually here it is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can grab this otherwise instead and just open it. Let's just open that instead. Let's grab that. We'll copy that as a path and we'll open that up here real quickly. In any case, we've got it pre-saved, but I can go ahead and save it again. We'll go ahead and try and get that open. Like I said, we're having some issues here. I'm going to cancel that out. We'll open this up and I'll show you what I'm talking about. When you save this piece, what's going to happen is you'll get this. You see how it opens off center? The center point, the starting point is here. That point is now here, and that's going to open right there. So if you line up your starting point right where that junction of the end is, it's going to be spaced out the way you expect it to be on the machine. It's not going to be centered in the piece. Now, if you're in Wilcom, they have a tool to set your start and end point. And so back in the day, I would do that and set it up very similarly. And this is just a PDF version of it that I had from an earlier article. And I did the same thing. We had somebody wrote 1997 on something, but it was supposed to be from 1987 as a historical piece. What did we end up doing to fix that? Same thing. I found this junction at the 9. And in this case, I went ahead and made because I had to leave this with my production team, I went ahead and left them with this graphical representation of the rest of the numbers that were still there. I went ahead and printed that out. I did like a regular JPEG and slapped that into the at scale into the file so that when I printed it out, I had the background image and you could see this centering mark that was here. We've got the centering mark right here where we've got that layout, and we started at the junction where that column went up into the 9, and I dropped the 8 in by itself in a very similar way. So really, the gist of this is just to understand that you find yourself a registration point somewhere that is easy to identify on the existing garment. You hoop the garment up straight to the hoop arms as close as you can. You create the piece that you need by referencing the original text. So type out the original text as it should look, then find your reference point, make just the piece you need and align it where it's supposed to be, then delete the piece that's there, delete the entire name that's there. And then when you output your final stitch guide or the stitch file, you have a guide to where it's going to start from that existing point, from the point that you can see that's easily identified on your stitch out. Again, like I said, most of the time, are you going to be able to do this and make this work? That is a really hard question to deal with, right? And something that you may not really want to do. Like I said, it's not something you necessarily want to deal with. It's not something you necessarily want to that you want to send out if it's got a lot of quality issues, if there are holes or gaps or things that look rough. And sometimes we just don't do that. In fact, I'm going to show you just again, it's something I've shown multiple times before. I had somebody bring in a vintage garment where they started to tear out their own text and they wanted us to do the same thing. And honestly, it really is difficult to make this look good, to the point where they started tearing out a very simple name on a satin jacket, and they realized immediately, they're like, man, this is not going to work out. It doesn't look good. We don't want these holes that are in it. This guy came in with this piece, and it was a vintage Hollywood jacket that was from a animal trainer setup, and he was also an animal trainer, and he wanted to use this vintage jacket from this important company in Hollywood that did cattle training and animal training and stuff. And so they wanted to have this name that said Bob be David. I matched as closely as I could with a standard font to their existing font they wanted. But in the end, what we did a cover up. We did a contrast color cover up in a style that looked similar, looked decent. Probably would have done a patch these days instead, especially as there's now a lot more desire for patches. They are now acceptable in a way that they never were before. Back in the day, they wanted direct embroidery only. And in fact, they really did want to go with this style again. And frankly, when we looked at it, and as you started turning it out, you can actually see a little bit on this piece. There's already holes in the garment. There are pretty big holes. That white that you're seeing in the middle of the B on Bob, that's not bobbin, those are holes. Those are holes that are already showing through the filling, and he was pulling out pieces of filling from this lined piece. So he instead direct embroidered over it. Do I like embroidering over embroidery? Almost never. With a little tiny bit of satin stitch like we had left here, this was fine. This didn't cause us any trouble. Looked really nice when it was done. These days, I would certainly either stitch this all, even if I was stitching it as if direct with a full coverage, I would still probably stitch the background as a patch and then applique it on. Or I would use just patch material as the background instead of using full stitching. But in this case, it was direct embroidered over. Better by far to do a patch. And if you really want that finished look, a great way to handle that is create a patch that doesn't have a final edge on it, where we just do the fill in the names, then do a placement stitch and a standard satin cover and use it like an applique so you actually don't have to drive your needle through any of the existing embroidery. Even if you want a fully embroidered look, you can do that. Sometimes it also benefits from using a little heat seal between them and pressing it down. But that is a much better way to do that. In any case, folks, we are definitely about at time. I'm not going to cover the drawing stuff. I think I'm going to come back to that later, some object model stuff. It's stuff we've covered before. But since I am thoroughly done with flying blind and Evie Mux not showing me my screen, all I have is a grayed out box where I'm supposed to see the preview mode. I'm going to let you guys go, and I'm also going to let myself off the hook. Hopefully there was some useful stuff in there. Like I said, coming up next week, we're going to have, like I said, efforting should be happening. Joe said he wants to do it, and he's got samples he wants to show. We should be talking about print, applique, multimedia. I'm going to be showing some samples of some custom sublimated multimedia that I've done, and I'm going to show you some stuff in Embrilliance where it has some really cool superpowers for handling images inside of appliques and prints and stuff. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to show Joe Kramer's really fantastic printed applique stuff and just multimedia work where he's stitched with prints. So we're going to talk about that next week, and hopefully you guys will be able to tune in. Thanks for putting up with the technical errors today, and hopefully you guys get something out of it. Keep your heads down, keep your nose to the grindstone. The holidays will pass soon, but as we're coming into them, remember, there is no such thing as an embroidery emergency. No one's dying, no lives are on the line. Let yourself have a little bit of grace, but know, if you know the way these things work, you can fix it. All right? Know the stitches, know the materials, know your software. You're going to be all right. All right. Make something cool, and I will talk to you guys next week.